Really glad to have back the Director of Research over at FAIR. It is Matt O'Brien. Matt, how are you?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, really appreciate having you on. When I heard the president sign this proclamation today, and we knew something was coming, I immediately thought I've got to get with FAIR, which is Federation for American Immigration Reform. And we had a great conference there a month or so ago. The election kind of went the way we wanted it to, and it kind of didn't. We can talk about that in a second. But what does this proclamation do? Is a proclamation, does it have any weight at all? Or is that, this is what I plan on doing?
It does have some weight. So what the president is trying to do is exercise the authority that he has under the Immigration and Nationality Act to restrict the admission of certain classes of aliens. And that was the power that was affirmed by the Supreme Court in Trump v. Hawaii.
Right.
So that gives a pretty clear authority to the president for the national interest of the United States to be able to sort of amend the procedures along the border. Now, where this is going to get interesting, the asylum statutes actually say that people who are physically present in the United States can seek asylum regardless of how they got here. That confrontation between two provisions of the Immigration and Nationality Act was addressed somewhat in the Trump v. Hawaii case.
Yeah.
And the court implied that the power for the president to be able to restrict the admission of certain classes of aliens in response to national interest was a sort of broad provision that was intended to enable the president to make immigration work effectively for the United States. But they haven't directly addressed the question of what happens when it conflicts with the asylum law.
Yeah, I think we're about to find out. It is Matt O'Brien from FAIR, Federation for American Immigration Reform. It's fairus.org, fairus.org. Go there. It's pretty interesting because I guess the next obvious question would be, can we physically stop them from coming in, actually setting foot on American soil?
Well, I mean, theoretically, as a sovereign nation, we can do that. We have the power to do it. And the legal right, as it's being represented in mainstream media to apply for asylum, is not, in fact, a right. What it is when people meet the threshold for credible fear in the United States, then we have an international law obligation to hear their claim and then decide whether they merit asylum or not, which is an entirely discretionary form of relief.
Well, if we can, that's great. Let me interject this. For my audience right now, tell them the definition of asylum, because I know that it doesn't have anything to do with wanting a better job or wanting the American dream or wanting a better house. It's much different than that, isn't it? What is the definition of somebody who's seeking asylum and when asylum can be granted?
Sure, it's a very specific definition. And so asylum and refugee status, which are judged by the same standard, require someone to be subject to persecution either by their government or parties that the government is unable or unwilling to control that are acting in a government-like fashion.
Okay.
And they need to be persecuted on account of one of the 5 protected grounds, which are race, religion, nationality, political opinion, and membership in a particular social group. And none of those things seem to apply to the vast majority of the people in this case.
And just to put it in basic terms, when Saddam Hussein lined people up against the wall and shot them because of their political beliefs, or Hamas does that over in Israel / what would be Palestine, now you're talking about people who need refuge and could seek asylum and would really have grounds for it. Or if you're standing in Tiananmen Square in China, in Beijing, and you get run over by a tank because you held up a sign saying, "I want freedom," that is also a class of people that would deserve it. It's not about finding a better job or a better house.
That's correct. So there's a term that's used in the law that's called generalized conditions of civil strife. And the law specifically says that generalized conditions of civil strife don't apply. So the mere fact that your country has become economically lousy or that there's political turmoil or even armed conflict doesn't mean that you're eligible for asylum. It's only in situations, for instance, if you are a Sunni Muslim who is being persecuted by the Shiite government of Iran for your religious beliefs that you would become eligible for asylum.
It's Matt O'Brien, Director of Research over at FAIR, FAIRUS.org, fairus.org. It's the Federation for American Immigration Reform. So what has to happen? In a perfect world, if you could press a button, Matt, what has to happen with our immigration laws that would prevent something like this ever starting again? Thousands and thousands of people thinking they can get in because our laws are either they're so watered down or they're just not enforced. Does anything Better question might be, if we actually enforce the laws in the books, would we be facing this?
Probably not, although the courts have been overly broad in interpreting some of these laws, as have the immigration courts. So I think what really needs to happen is the president should actually take a look at this and consider exercising the powers that were affirmed under Trump v. Hawaii and saying, listen, we're temporarily going to suspend land admissions from the Northern Triangle, and anyone who believes that they qualify for refugee or asylum protections needs to seek those protections from a Department of State facility closer to home.
Yeah.
People can apply for refugee status through an embassy or a consulate. The advantage to that is you're not creating chaos along the southern border, and people can actually do this. If you're in Honduras, there's nothing that stops you from requesting refugee status in the U.S. Embassy in Honduras.
Right. And you pass by several consulates in Mexico as well on the way here, and nobody's stopping there. They just want to come here. In fact, what do you make of this? When Mexico offered refugee status, even some money and a job to a lot of these people, they rejected it. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's 100% evidence of the fact that most of these people are coming here seeking economic opportunity. They're not, in fact, real asylees or refugees.
Yeah.
And I think, in a very large number of cases, these people are being manipulated for political gain. This was an organized caravan. There are people behind this who have an axe to grind about U.S. immigration policy. And so while I have, as a private bar attorney, represented many people who are applying for asylum and was involved in many asylum cases when I worked for the government, I just don't believe the vast majority of these people are people who qualify for asylum. Plus, we have to pose the other key question, which is, to what extent are people responsible for their own political destiny? I mean, it's all well and good if you're having problems in your country, but should the first response be to leave? I mean, if that were the case with the founding fathers, we'd still be subjects of the crown. So at a certain point, people can't blame the problems in their own countries on everyone else in the world. They have to try and fix them on their own.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I would much rather, if there's something going wrong here, I'd much rather fix it here than go run to Canada or to Mexico. It's Matt O'Brien, Director of Research over at FAIR, fairus.org. Go there. Great organization trying to get things done right when it comes to immigration in this country. Matt, do we know who's in this caravan? We know that there are women and children in the front for the optics of it. After that, who do we have?
Well, the vast majority of them are men between the ages of like 18 and 45, military-age men, and they're typically the demographic that would be responsible for leading social change and political change in their own countries.
Yeah.
So, most of these people are motivated by an understandable desire to come to the United States, where even if they're at the low end of the wage scale, they're still doing much better than they would be at home.
Right.
And of course, when they send remittance payments back to their families, they can benefit from the exchange rate because American currency is worth more in their country. So they're effectively doubling or tripling their salaries.
Well, everything you just said sounds to be an incentive to me to do it legally. Why is it that they insist on doing it illegally? We're letting 1 million people a year in. Wait in line.
Well, the problem is that the way our system works, it's not merit-based. So we don't have the option of simply offering a space in the United States to people that have some kind of skill we think they can exploit to their profit here in the U.S.
Right.
It's based on nepotism because the vast majority of immigration is family-based. And the mere fact that you happen to have a relative in the U.S. who qualifies to sponsor you is the basis for migration.
Matt, when did that change? My grandfather came in 1928. He was a builder. His brothers were builders. You had to show that you had not only a skill that you could help the United States better itself, but you also had to show that you had a sponsor. I mean, when did this change to where we've got chain migration? If somebody comes and has a baby here, the mother stays, you bring the father over, the grandfather, the grandmother, the uncles, the aunts. Is there a specific time when that happened?
Yeah, in 1965, with the passage of the Hart-Celler Act, which was pushed by Senator Kennedy, we changed from what was known as the national origins quota system, which is derided by a large number of revisionist historians as racist. But it really wasn't racist. What Congress had done was in 1912 and 1922, I believe, although I may be wrong on the dates, they took a snapshot of the demographics of the United States. And they said, listen, we have a mix of people who have immigrated from different countries that seems to be working and making this a prosperous country.
Yeah.
We have communities ready to receive from places like Germany and Italy and Eastern European Jewish folks who are ready to receive new immigrants. So they set a quota for each country to maintain the balance that we had and started allowing people to immigrate, and they were received by ethnic communities that were familiar with their language,
right,
and then helped them to assimilate. Now that was deemed, essentially by Senator Kennedy as not consistent with the civil rights movement and racist. And so they changed it in 1965, which resulted in the system that we have today, which frankly doesn't work very well.
So even 40 some odd, 50 some odd years ago, we had the left in this country screaming racism, xenophobic, and so on to try to shut down what actually made sense.
We did, and they slowly but surely stripped away a lot of the checks on the immigration system. So when you came in, even at the beginning of the Hart-Celler Act, you were still expected to be able to pay for yourself.
Yeah.
We deported people for being public charges. If you were going to apply for citizenship, you were required to have 2 witnesses who knew you from your community or your job vouch for you. And slowly but surely, with different changes and amendments to the immigration legislation, we've stripped all these things away to the point where we don't have a lot of meaningful distinctions left between lawfully present immigrants and citizens. Now we're finding efforts to strip away the distinctions between the people who are temporarily here and U.S. citizens and people who are unlawfully here and U.S. citizens.
Yeah. It's from fairus.org. It's Matt O'Brien, the Director of Research. Matt, always incredible information. Thanks for the updates today. Let's keep an eye on the caravan and talk again very soon.